Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Better Call Saul Season 3, Episode 10. The season finale of Season 3. This one's called Lantern. And before we get into anything that is in the episode, I would like to point out something that's not in the episode, namely Mike. No appearance of Mike in this episode. Not that that's not a problem with the episode at all. It's a beautiful episode, but I thought it was interesting that we have gotten a good bit of him this season, but he's kind of been a little bit more ancillary than he had been in maybe Season 2. And he was really the finale of Season 2 is all about Mike, and here we are with a much heavier weighted towards Jimmy finale and really whole season. And we open up with a very short cold open. I don't know, I don't time these things out, but my gut tells me that this is the shortest cold open of the season and possibly of this show. And it's just Jimmy and Chuck as young people, as not children. Well, I guess Jimmy's a child, and they're out in their tent in the backyard in the time when they grew up, reading The Adventures of Mabel. That was referenced earlier in this season. If you've forgotten, it's the book that Jimmy picks up off the shelf in, I don't know, episode 4-ish, I want to say. It may have been episode 1, actually. But you're going back a good ways. And he talks to Chuck about, oh, remember this book? And here we are with just a little reminder that these two guys are brothers. They're human being type brothers. They aren't like, neither one of them is twisted or maniacal or completely without feeling. They are both, and they've come up together. They have all these complex emotional history that, I mean, we may not even need to know the details of, but basically when you grow up with somebody, you form connections, and you get this great zoom in on the lantern, which again is the title of the episode and really hinting at the end of this episode. And it's such a great open, especially knowing what happens throughout the episode. Like, just for laying aside everything else that we already know about Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad and how good those things are, this episode by itself is so beautifully put together as its own story, as well as the capper to the whole story that we've been seeing this season. And this is just the beginning of that. And it is taking place in the timeline of this other story, though, so we are picking up with Kim after her car crash. And my gut told me that Kim's car crash was going to be a big change for Kim. And it is to a certain extent. But to start off with, really here in this aftermath, we see that it's also a huge change for Jimmy. And the spectacular way to go with this would have been to have her killed. She obviously very easily could have been. That would have explained why she's not in Breaking Bad. That would have, I mean, it wouldn't have been completely out of place, and I'm sure the writers discussed the possibility of killing her off in this moment. But instead, we get to deal with the fallout, and Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad are all about the fallout. And here she is, we see her at the hospital. She's getting her cast on. Her and Jimmy drive out in the Esteem, and he's picking up the loose pages of the documents that she had, crashed with, that they were in the car and spread all out. He's there picking up the pieces after her crash, and it's really about him picking up her pieces. And I really like that arc with where Jimmy's at and where he's going and what this helps him to realize. Before we get specifics on that, though, we have Chuck digging his grave, as we know literally now, at HHM. And he's following up with his lawsuit. He says, listen, we can either sue and go to court. And his tone here is so great, too. He's so just reasonable sounding. He seems like just the most reasonable guy. He's like, listen, I could sue you, but we don't really want that. Or you can pay me off, but you don't have the money, so I guess you're just gonna have to let me hang out here and forgive me for being crazy for a bit, but you're gonna let me back in. And Howard is not having it. Howard has broken out. I'm really so happy with him in the last episode, and now here in this episode. He is calling the McGill brothers on their BS. All right, last episode, he nailed Jimmy to the floor 100%. By the way, I'm totally on board with what Howard's opinion was. Don't think Howard's a perfect person by any means, but he was right about what Jimmy's motivations were. And here he's absolutely leveling the gun at Chuck, and he says, first of all, you built this firm, and you're going to take it to court. Okay? Why? Secondly, you were my friend. Like, I thought of you as a personal friend. Now, there is the age difference between them, which I'm sure matters somewhat. Howard was probably not a kid, but maybe a teenager when Chuck first met him, so Chuck doesn't have the same respect for Howard that Howard has for Chuck, but Howard is definitely now come into his own. Like, he is a full-grown dude with his own deal and his own, interests, and he pays Chuck off. The law firm don't have the money, but Howard has the money. And out of his own pocket, he's giving Chuck his first severance check of $3 million. And Chuck is completely blindsided by this. He's not expecting it. I mean, you can tell he was thinking, we're just going to let this all be bygones, and I'll be back in the firm, and I'm dealing with my electricity allergy, and it's all good. And he had burned too many bridges. Howard had been pushed too far. He's not willing to support this guy anymore. He's not willing to be in the same boat with him anymore. And he just, and again, literally, now that we know the end of the episode, like, puts the final nail in the coffin by forcing Chuck to stand in front of everybody and tells them that he's retiring. And he does it with grace and positivity, and hey, we're gonna miss Chuck, but, he's going on to better things, and he's really earned this retirement, and Chuck hates it. And Howard has them applaud him out of the building, and that was the moment that I felt like that as someone who does not love Chuck, I've been a Chuck defender, okay? I don't think that Chuck is the worst thing ever, but Chuck has been a bane of Jimmy's existence, and he has done his own wrong things that he certainly does not deserve to get away scot-free with. This is the moment that I was happy about for Chuck, because I wanted him to get his comeuppance. I wanted him to be humiliated, and here he's humiliated on the inside. Again, Howard doesn't make him look bad. Howard doesn't, throw mud in his face and say, here's the guy who was gonna sue us because we didn't want him because he was crazy. And he's gonna leave now because I paid him off. That's what kind of person is. No, Howard doesn't do that. He just lets Chuck stew in his own juices, and that applause, the mix on that applause, and the way that this was edited close in on Chuck with the crowd of people around him, it felt so much like an attack. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you come into writing a scene and say, we're going to have this guy applauded out of the building and shoot it and mix it and write it in such a way that it's totally just a slam dunk attack on him. But it was. Okay, it super was. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Kim, back at home, are considering the possibilities of what could have happened. Jimmy is thinking about, hey, you could have died. Kim thinking about, I could have killed somebody else, which, little insight there into their different values. I thought that Jimmy here is moving somewhere. All this time he's been interested in hanging on to this office because he had put the idea of the office up in his mind as the symbol of him and Kim's relationship. And, and their success together, and they're working together, and he saw that as the crowning achievements of what they were building. And now that he's seen Kim wreck herself for this office, again, literally, I guess I'm going to say that word a lot this episode, but now that Kim almost has killed herself in her attempt to keep this office that she didn't want, right? She's taking on these extra clients because she doesn't know where the money's come from, and she doesn't want to let Jimmy down. Jimmy realizes that the symbol of the thing that he thought was so important is not nearly as important to him as the actual relationship that they have together. And he shuts down the office. He goes and, sublets it out. We get them selling off all the furniture, and it was surprisingly emotional for me to see them closing this office down, to see them leaving this space that they've only been in for, I think they were in the last season, but it hasn't been, a huge part of the show. And yet, for one thing, visually, I love that office. There is so much, there's the reflection on the top of the office, a little reflective, not tiles exactly, but whatever you call those things in the ceiling that really give you a great cinematic effect and give the room more depth. There was that glass wall that they made amazing use of in several scenes this season. And just from an aesthetic point of view, I'm sad to lose it. And I'm also just sad, like Jimmy is, to kind of see him lose his dream. It's not going to be there anymore. Like, this is part of his life that's really, really over. And in the middle of this realization that Jimmy's having about what really matters to him and what is really important to him, he goes to Chuck, and he genuinely tries to paper things over. He says, listen, Chuck, I regret some of the stuff that I did. I was wrong. And it rings hollow to Chuck, and it rings hollow a little bit to me too, because in this scene, I'm on board with Chuck. Chuck says to Jimmy, why are you wasting your time on this emotion? Why bring yourself down groveling here to me when clearly you're just going to do this again? And we know that there is some element of Jimmy's DNA, for lack of a better term. It may literally be his DNA, but some fundamental part of his being that is never going to fully get away from being Slippin' Jimmy, who's never going to stop being a con artist, who's never going to think of others before he thinks of himself. He may think of others most of the time, but he's going to think of himself too. And Chuck realizes that these are tendencies that are going to lead to his negative outcomes for him and the people that he loves. And he says, listen, this is going to keep happening to you. You might as well just accept it. And that's one element of this scene that's really amazing. And the other element is this final line that Chuck delivers to Jimmy as Jimmy's leaving. Again, literally the final line, because Jimmy won't see Chuck again after this. He says, I don't want to hurt you, but the truth is, you've never really meant that much to me. And you can tell it hurts Jimmy. And once Jimmy's gone, you can tell that it hurt Chuck to say it. That he doesn't 100% feel that way, although there is still much bitterness in his heart, no doubt, toward his brother. He hates that he's burned this bridge, but in a sense, I don't know if Chuck thinks of it this way, but in a story sense, it really works out in a similar mirror fashion to how the chicanery episode turned out. Jimmy hurts Chuck in the chicanery episode, but at least short term, that pain that he causes does help Chuck. Now, that is not Jimmy's plan, all right? Jimmy's totally, again, I'm just trying to make his case that Chuck is crazy. But showing Chuck that he's crazy helps him get the help that he needs. Somewhat. And here, Chuck is giving good advice to Jimmy. Advice that is definitely is going to help turn Jimmy into Saul. Because this is, A, Jimmy is stuck in this cycle. And B, he's giving him the emotional distance he needs to move on from Chuck. Maybe. I mean, there's, knowing what happens at the end of this episode, there's going to be some stuff that Jimmy still feels, but leaving him with this is going to be a gift to Chuck. This is going to Jimmy, I'm sorry, and ultimately to Saul Goodman, because he needs this shell that's building up around him in resistance to the negativity that his brother's been throwing at him this whole time. Chuck has been sandblasting Jimmy and waiting for him to grow a thicker skin and then sandblasting it again this whole time. And again, not on purpose, I don't think. Maybe this final parting shot is Chuck trying to give Jimmy sort of just the leash to go and leave him alone. But it was not intentional for most of this. But that is what has happened, that Jimmy has become stronger. And, you know, Jimmy doesn't take the message, though, right away. The message about just forget about remorse, why care, this is who you are. Jimmy isn't willing to accept that yet, and he wants to patch things up with Irene. And I told you so, okay? For those of you who are watching and have been watching over the last few weeks, and especially last week's episode, not yesterday, last week's episode, I said, you're not going to be able to put these relationships back the way they were without some serious, it's just, they're not just going to go back together. Jimmy has broken these people's friendship, and it doesn't just get fixed. So I had some people in comments arguing with me, all right? And maybe, I'm not saying that every single time a friendship is broken in real life that can't be put back together, but in the context of this show, this was going to happen, okay? Jimmy was going to make a big problem. But I do like that Jimmy is going back and trying to fix this. I have a little problem here, though. Just the smallest problem. Because Jimmy finds out that he can't fix this just by talking, all right? He can't just go in here and speak to these ladies and smooth everything over and it all go back to hunky-dory. They have had the soil has been salted so thoroughly that nothing's going to grow there. And he goes and he talks about it to Kim. And here's my problem. He talks about it to Kim as if she understands the situation, as if she knows what's happening. And it's not explicit, all right? He doesn't say to her, and, you know, I ruined this lady's friendships and now I can't put them back together. But there's something about this scene that makes me feel like that Kim knows that Jimmy has done this in order to get his payout. I mean, the fact that she knows that he's trying to put it back together would make me assume that she knows something about it. I don't know. It feels very out of character for Kim to be saying, oh, man, yeah, you screwed that lady's life over and she doesn't have any friends anymore? Well, you better fix it. Like, that's not the Kim that I know, but it was not exactly clear to me how much information that she had about this scheme that Jimmy had pulled. But she does give Jimmy good advice. She says to it, you know, and he says something that Mike had said earlier in the season too. He says, I'm not good at building things. I'm good at tearing them down. And Mike might be good at building things, but he hasn't been doing that. And I love that both of these characters have come to the same point where they realize that they want to build, but they can't. That the only way they can build is by tearing down, by using the negative. And Kim says to him, listen, play to your strengths. You know, you've got to do you in this situation. It's not just going to smooth over. You got into this. And again, I can't accept that she just knows that he ruined this woman's life. Okay, maybe she does. Maybe she's way more forgiving than me, and she's on board with all of you guys, some of you that were in the comments, and she's like, why don't you give Jimmy a break? It's like a moral gray area and stuff when you make an old lady feel bad. Okay, maybe that's her, but that's not my read on Kim. But, you know, she does give him this advice to be himself, and Jimmy takes it to heart. And Jimmy goes up to do the chair yoga, which I love how they set that up. I love that they gave him a spot to have that happen. I think there might have been some talk. It seems like you could have had that happen in the bingo room, and it would have been interesting to have the reversal happen in the same place that he really, you know, hit it hard to make Irene feel bad in the first place. I don't know exactly what the choice was there, why they decided to go with the chair yoga, where it doesn't make sense. My gut tells me that maybe it was just a production standpoint. Like maybe they didn't have that set for some reason, that they weren't able to get there, and it was just easy, or they didn't have enough extras. Who knows? That's speculation completely. Maybe there's a really good writing reason that I'm not picking up on why it needed to be chair yoga instead of bingo. But he goes to the chair yoga, leaves his mic on, pays, or maybe not pays, but has Irene's lawyer come in, who I'd forgotten was there, but she was from, I think, Davison, Maine, one of his junior associates there, and calls him on the carpet. He goes outside, and she, does the thing where she tells him what he's doing wrong, and he acts all like, yeah, I did screw him over, right, directly into the mic, knowing the mic is hot. And I was very hard on Jimmy last episode, and I got a lot of flack for it. And it was, I thought Jimmy was going to be done for me, right? I really thought he was going to be sort of like final season of Breaking Bad Walter White, where I'm watching, and it's fun to watch this guy try to figure things out, but I was not able to get behind him. But here I am with Jimmy, and Jimmy this is a sacrifice for Jimmy. Because despite what he does here and what he says, he genuinely, I think, does care about these ladies. It was hard for him to do the thing that he did to Irene. That doesn't excuse the fact that he did it, but him burning this bridge and cutting off all of these people who genuinely love him is a sacrifice. All right? He's humiliating himself, and really dragging his own name through the mud. And that's a bad move as a lawyer, first of all. Obviously, just like from a mechanical standpoint, this is one good reason why he might have to come back under a different name. But I think it also really has a personal impact. I think he's personally hurt to see these people go, but he knows that he needs to hurt them, these people that he does genuinely care about, even though he was willing to screw them over to get some money, he needs to hurt them to get them back on track. And so he does the thing that he's best at. He cons them. He plays them, and it works. They band together against him. Jimmy McGill is burned, and Saul Goodman, I assume, will be emerging soon, because that name, Jimmy McGill, not going to be a real hot commodity in the law profession anymore. Our side plot, by the way, this episode is Nacho, and it's a huge one. Nacho, dealing with his, Hector comes and talks to his dad. His dad almost says no, like it's very, very close, and Nacho's like, dude, like it's not just you, it's not just me. Think about your, my brothers and your wife and all of the family, and like this could end up with you dead. Not cool. And he manages to talk his dad into begrudgingly accepting Hector's money, but Hector is still not convinced. Hector he says, I can't trust this guy, and the implication there, at least if I'm Nacho, is that I might want to get rid of him so that I have smoother operations. Nacho is, the rock and the hard place are closing in on Nacho, and he decides that he's going to kill Hector. And he brings his gun, and he follows Hector to the house or wherever it is that they're at, maybe possibly the restaurant. I didn't exactly get a read on that location. And he tracks him inside, and about the time he's going to shoot him, who pulls up but Hector's other two goons, who are there for the meeting with Gus and the guys from Mexico. Nacho hadn't gotten that phone call, but he plays it off like he had, and this meeting goes down. The guys from Mexico are like, listen, we know that you have some issues, Hector, but we're going to stick with the one route, which is probably good news to Nacho's ears. And Hector doesn't take it well, to put it lightly. He loses it. He starts screaming and yelling about how his family built this business and how he's being disrespected. And quite naturally, he goes into one of his fits. And it's interesting. I felt for Hector more in this scene than I maybe have in a long time. This sort of helplessness that he's feeling, I think some of it's due to his age. He's, coming up on the fact that he's not a young buck anymore, and he's not able to sort of be the tough gangster that he once was, but he still has some of the power, but he's seen it stripped away throughout his lifetime, and this is like his moment to finally break and let all that out and let all that frustration out. And it just so happens that it causes him to have a heart attack, and the pills do not work this time, which I'm so glad, by the way, that they set up the pills not working the first time and working vice versa. You know what I'm saying. The pills, they didn't do what Nacho wanted them to do the first time. He did not collapse and have his heart attack. The placebo effect was strong enough to get him through. And that set us up to not be certain what was going to happen here. But it is the season finale, so we have a little bit of a hint. And he collapses. 911 is called. The ambulance comes. Gus is, A, very take charge, which I love. B, very much interested in Hector staying alive. It plays, if you're not knowing Gus, it plays as if he's very concerned about Hector and he wants, he needs this old man to stay alive and he doesn't want this death on his hands or whatever. But, and there might be some self-preservation issues there too. I don't know exactly what's going through Gus's mind. But the big thing that I think is going through Gus's mind is, you do not die before I've had time to stomp you into the mud like the bug you are. He's keeping him alive as good as he can. And I'm assuming here that this is what leads to Hector's paralysis, but we don't have that knowledge exactly. It could be that next season we see him fine, talking, walking around. He's all good. Maybe they push it off. This would not be the first time that Better Call Saul has showed us something that we thought would be one thing in the finale and then turned it to be something else in the season opener. But at the moment, let's just assume that he's paralyzed. And to be fair, at this point, when this is being recorded, he could be either one, because the writers haven't sat down and figured out everything they're going to do with the season that's coming up, which is going to be amazing. But to get back to Chuck and the lantern, Chuck is having a breakdown. And there are a couple scenes here that are really powerful. To start off with, after his confession to Jimmy that... But we got to finish things up with Chuck. For good this time. And after Chuck's, let's say, outburst to Jimmy, not an outburst I say, but his emotional attack on Jimmy, saying that he didn't care, Chuck takes a turn for the worse with his condition. We see it, he rolls over in the middle of the night to record something on his journal. He stops and at some point decides that he's not fighting it anymore. Whether he's crazy or not, he is not going to have the power on in his house. And he turns all the breakers off, all the lights turn off. It's a beautiful scene. I loved, just as he was flipping the breakers, like each of the lights going off in the background. And he goes to the power box, and it's still turning just a little bit. I don't know if you guys remember the power boxes working that way, and I think many of them still do, actually. But if you go outside and you look at your power box, there's a little disc that turns as power comes into your house and measures how much you're using. And if you're using a lot, it goes zzz, and if you're using a little, it goes zzz. And something in Chuck's house is still drawing power. And he tries to deal with it in a sane manner. He calls the power company. They can't get out. So he starts unplugging things and pulling out light bulbs. And then things start to get real bad. He starts smashing the walls, breaking up the bookcases, pulling wires out willy-nilly, pulling out insulation all over the floor. And this scene is just him basically smashing the walls up. The way that they shot, it's just a montage. But the music and the way that it's put together is really sad. I mean, and to be also, in addition to that, I thought that there was an interesting motif here happening with him keep going back to this power that's still moving. And it I think is him, the metaphor here is that he wants to be rid of all these emotional attachments. He wishes that what he said to Jimmy was true. And he wants to rip that piece of himself out, and he cannot do it. He cannot tear that part of himself out. He's stuck caring. Despite everything that he said, despite all of the hurtful words that he's hurled at Jimmy, he's still stuck caring about this guy that he thinks is a loser and a con man and hurtful to all the people that he loves, and he can't stop it. No matter how much he tears apart his life, he cannot stop the small beating heart, however small it might be, that he has for Jimmy. And so, to deal with the power situation, he cuts the power off completely, smashes the wheel itself, and the power is gone. And to deal with the heart situation, he cuts everything off. He commits suicide with the lantern, and the way that scene plays out, the kicking and the holes in the walls, and the idea that Chuck has destroyed himself, and not just destroyed himself, but those holes in the walls structurally are going to make that fire burn faster. The insulation that he pulled out is probably going to catch on fire and make the fire burn faster. He has primed himself for this, both metaphorically and literally. And here he is kicking the lamp, trying to make it look like an accident because he knows that that's what it's going to look like. And maybe, I think, in his last moment, trying to do a service to Jimmy so that Jimmy can say, oh, Chuck, that crazy guy, he knocked his lantern over. I told him it would happen. Oh, well, that guy got what he deserved because he was crazy. But Chuck isn't crazy. Exactly. He's got mental issues and he's committing suicide, and he shouldn't be. But not in this instance, he's choosing. He's choosing to end it all because he can't suffer himself anymore. He is not the man that he wants to be. He cannot turn off those emotions that plague him so greatly. And so we see the very slight, fire catch in the window, and we cut to credits. And there are, I believe they put up a suicide prevention hotline number, which is, I think, important. Anybody who happens to be contemplating suicide, please don't. There's so much more life that could go so much better for you, and don't leave it. Don't give up on yourself. There's an element to this that reminds me of the Telltale Heart when Chuck is ripping up those walls, and the lantern that plays such a big part in the Telltale Heart, where the slat, light falling on the eye of the man who he kills, and him not being able to get the pulsing of the heart outside of his head. I thought this. I will also give credit. Someone else mentioned it in the Reddit thread, but when I was watching that montage, I thought, this reminds me of the Telltale Heart. I'm not the only person who thought that, though, so I want to mention that I didn't steal that thought, but it's also not original. And it just, the way that they constructed this is so powerful and so brilliant. And this isn't the end that I wanted for Chuck. I'm a Chuck defender, okay? I'm not on the train of the F Chuck stuff, okay? That's not me. But I did have problems with him, okay? I really enjoyed seeing him get his business taken away from him and essentially humiliated in front of all of his colleagues, because he deserved that. He didn't deserve this, though, in my opinion. He built it for himself. He got here on his own, and he built his, as do all the characters in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, he built his own ruination. But there was no, like, yeah, he got what's coming to him moment for me here. They made me feel for Chuck in this final episode in a way that maybe I've never felt for him before. And he cut off himself from everybody that he loved and died alone. And makes me sad. I don't know if it makes y'all sad, but that's it. That's the episode. That's the end of what I have to say for this season of Better Call Saul. It was incredible, okay? And especially in this final episode, putting a cap on everything. Wow. I was just blown away by so much of this show. And the send-off they gave Michael McKean as Chuck and that character, and the things that they've set up, and the plates that they can spin now going forward. And maybe we're going to actually see Saul Goodman as a lawyer next season. It could happen. I hope that it does. I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap series, and if you did, leave a like. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. I appreciate all of your feedback so much. I tried to answer as many of you guys as I could, even the ones of you who were very disagreeable about my opinion. I respect that you don't agree with me. I still appreciate y'all watching. Thank you so much. I'll see you next year with another episode of the Better Call Saul recap, assuming they're renewed. Take care, guys.